Hello, everybody, and welcome to Theory Underground. What you're about to hear is an episode that I did with Nance, where we were joined by philosopher Nina Power to talk about the course that she is teaching at Theory Underground throughout the year of 2025. That's right, it's 2025 now, if you're watching this while this video is new. And the course begins this month in January. It will take place on the fourth Sunday of every month. But that's not all. This course is being paired with some other courses. And the only way that you can enroll is to become a subscriber at Theory Underground. The point is to break out of the course model, where there's a course for this and a course for that and a course for this and a course for that. And to really establish the fact that Theory Underground is an emerging school of philosophy, of thought, a whole approach to the world. It has a certain set of operating assumptions and is weaving together different subject matters, not synthetically or eclectically, but dialectically in terms of contradictions. Philosophy of nature is something that we have to think about. And we're going to span the entire history of Western philosophy in doing so, while at the same time bringing it into dialogue with political theory, which also spans the history of Western philosophy, while also bringing into dialogue the fault line theory, Slavoj Žižek versus Nick Land, the CCRU versus the Ljubljana school, accelerationism versus the Hegelian psychoanalysis that so many of you have come to love. We are doing all of this in an attempt to try to understand our current situation so that we can open up new horizons of possibility for organizing, for thinking, for communication, for writing, whatever it is that you're working on. There might be something here for you. So if you enjoy this, make sure to smash like. And if you want to sign up for this course, as well as the other ones that we are weaving into this braid here at Theory Underground, well, the link to subscribe is down in the description. Hope to see you there. Oh, and the course is available to people as a recording after the fact, so you can join late. If you're not able to attend the sessions when it works best for Nina, no worries. But the time that this will be taking place is 6 p.m. UK time, 1 p.m. Eastern time. And the first session is on January 26th. Hope to see you there. This may be an episode on Why Us. This may just be on an MStew. Who knows at this point? I don't even know anymore. But what I wanted to say is, Nina, this is the first time that we've had you on since we really actually figured out your schedule and got you like on the plan here at TU, and since Nance and I both started calling the stuff that we're doing Why Us, and basically in the piece that I wrote this morning, and just so nobody has to go back over what's already been said, I'll just kind of reiterate. I talk a bit about how the main threads or through lines of 2025 at Theory Underground all kind of fit together or complement one another in a certain way. And the way I described your course, I hadn't run this past you really, but maybe you kind of said something that was in this direction. I wonder what you'll think of it. That in a sort of sense, your 12-part course on nature is the return of the repressed. It's that aspect of the theory scene that has not been tarried with, and in fact has been often kind of just thrown out or just oversimplified and reduced to something. What do you think of that framing?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good actually, and it's interesting because I do think, as much as I love psychoanalysis, if one can even say that, or I'm very, very fond of the Slovenian school. I just reviewed Mladen Dolar's recent book on rumors, which is excellent, by the way, in that great series, whose name I forget, but there's a fantastic series, I think edited by Laurent de Sutter or something. Helen Rollins has a book in the series. Anyway, that's not the point. The point is that there's almost I'm very interested in things that people don't want to discuss. Not so much the reasons why they don't want to discuss them, but the things that they don't want to discuss, right? So particular concepts. And it's been very obvious, I think, the inherited wisdom, even in the 90s when I was studying philosophy, was that you can't directly talk about nature. Like it's almost gauche, like it's everything's mediated through language. Everything is, human beings have altered nature to such an extent that we can't really refer to something there. And okay, we can talk about ontology and we can talk about concepts of matter and substance, and so on. And this is all well and good, and Spinoza will be on the course. I'm a huge fan of Spinoza. I think Spinoza is one of the most, fantastic minds that has ever existed. But there's a kind of flattening and a virtualizing of some of these questions, and particularly around questions of essentialism. So the big critique of Aristotle that's constantly kind of ongoing. People are sort of battling these supposed demons, which are all sort of, the critiques are all about people making claims that seem to pin something down in a way that people don't want to be pinned down. If you say that it's of the nature of something that they are this, and therefore you must be saying an is an ought or something like this, right? So, if you're this kind of creature, then you must behave in these particular kinds of ways. And the liberal and Benjamin Studebaker actually had a fantastic piece, I think, published maybe on your site or his, about Deleuze and his critique of Deleuze that he was doing with you guys.
Yep.
In which he was very much criticizing this model of desire in a way, which is really compatible and coterminous with a sort of liberal individualism. And I don't think that Deleuze and Guattari meant that. And indeed, in what is philosophy, they seem to pull back, and they're very, very kind of upset in a way that a lot of their philosophy seems to be almost made for advertising campaigns and, the perennial exploitation of desire to sell you things, which we knew about since Freud and Edward Bernays, who was Freud's nephew. The Adam Curtis series, Century of the Self, makes it very clear that those psychoanalytic ideas were basically hijacked and used to sell things. And the surrealists were also making adverts for Shell, and they were tapping into this idea of a kind of free flow of libido and imagination and so on. And I think it's clear that liberal individualism, or that even the kind of edgy philosophical version of that, we sort of live, I think, in the confused, maybe almost aftermath of where that's gone. Like, we've gone as far as we possibly can, chasing the flows of desire. And perhaps there is a kind of return or an interest in questions of limits and essences and types and kinds. But more than that, I suppose, I'm first and foremost interested in what the Greeks were interested in. And this question, where the course is going to begin with this idea of phusis, which is quite hard to translate, but we might think of it in terms of growth. That if you think about a world in which we don't already have these kind of categories or disciplines of science and philosophy, and the separation of these sorts of worldviews or modes, frames, ways of looking at things, and you're simply observing the difference between different kinds of things. And here are some things that are alive and grow, and here are other things that were alive and are now dead, and here are some other things that were never alive at all, or in any meaningful way that we can understand, right? So these kind of separations about that relate to questions of growth, cycles. Like, if you spend time thinking about plants, it's very obvious that there's something going on here, and it's quite hard to keep plants alive, actually. It's always very good when one does so, but even then, one is kind of perhaps pruning little bits of dead plants, and how does removing the dead plant part of the plant contribute to the overall health of the plant, right? Very interesting questions. So, like, these very, very basic questions, really, and observations about life, about cycles, about what a thing is, whether a thing is alive or whether it is dead, or what we mean by alive and what we mean by dead, and what we mean by nature, including our own nature. What role, what participation do we have? I mean, this is a very pressing question, it seems to me. You know, we have kind of often very anxious versions. We have often very anxious answers to that question. You know, when we think about the Anthropocene and panic around climate change and the environment and those kinds of things, where the idea is that human beings have irreparably changed the earth. And I'm not making a judgment on that claim. I'm not particularly interested in whether that's true or false. In a sense, I think what I am interested in are the kind of concepts and the metaphysics that underpin our understanding of how we are part of this thing called nature, or if we are. Some people would argue that we're not, that we are fundamentally in many ways perhaps opposed to nature, or that there are our capacity to build and construct and create and create artifice and so on of all kinds has fundamentally and irreparably damaged our participation or changed our participation in nature, such that we can only talk about kind of second nature, or the idea that even the concept or the construct of the idea of nature is an imposition. People will make this argument often in relation to domestic animals, that our intervention into breeding has in a way remove the possibility of access to whatever came first. Like the cow is not the cow. The cow is whatever human beings have made of the cow, but I'm still fundamentally interested in this, what comes first and what we've forgotten about nature in that basic Greek sense. And this is clearly something that Heidegger returns to, but also perhaps more dramatically in a more controversial way, somebody like Pentti Linkola, who's a very, very, very controversial kind of anti-humanist environmentalist, we might say. He's very interested in the biosphere, but there's a branch of a kind of deep ecology or a green movement which becomes extremely anti-human, right? And I definitely am not kind of defending that, but I think it's worth absolutely looking at these, where some of these ideas take you as regard non-human nature. There's also the manifest bomb in the history of thinking about nature in the form of Darwinism, and which really places us back in the kind of species question. And when, for example, Nietzsche, who has this complex relation to Darwin, starts talking about the human animal, there's a very obvious and domestication and all of those things, like breeding and so on, and things that are kind of quite unpalatable to any kind of moral conception of the human. But he's cleverly unpicking all of those pretensions. We have this ongoing question, I think, about who or what we are, what is our nature. Is there any such thing as human nature? What are we making an appeal to when we appeal to that? Also, the question of sexes is often covered over in the name of a sort of generic humanism, or the idea that there is a generic human who is sort of neither male nor female, but somehow both, or neither. But this thing called the human, which on some level we might also want to defend. It's a very complicated question when what we mean when we refer to the human, and then our role or our participation in nature. And again, we're back to some of the Spinoza questions. We're back to the Greeks. We're also back to German Romanticism, something I'm very interested in. People thinkers like Schelling, very difficult, some of which is really difficult, but extremely interesting. And trying to point to this, connection, this almost ineffable participation that we have in growth, in life, in being, and I suppose all of these grand but very very old questions, I guess.
I'm not sure if my whistle came through with the noise suppression, but I'm impressed. That was, I guess I want to highlight some of the words you've used, for starters. limits, types, kinds, separations. Some of those limits being natural or necessary, that which of course brings in other limits being somewhat contingent, though they could, even if a lot of those limits are technically contingent, they can become necessary in practical terms. The limits has sort of raised its head in the theory scene, mostly through the Lacanians. I see it's the Lacanians who talk about the name of the Father, the no. They're thinking about castration, which is like something they get from Nietzsche ultimately. Like Freud was influenced by Nietzsche, right? We're talking about the domesticated animal, the animal that gets socialized and told you can't do whatever you want. And so there's like this repressed part that gnaws against the bars of the cage, so to speak. I mean, that's how he talks about it. But the Lacanians today will talk about the no, and then we'll have, you know, theorists, famous ones, saying things like, you know, the no and prohibition, that's lost its force, and so it's resulting in a rise in a sort of generalized psychotic culture, or to shout out Sean, who is the first person on the turn here. His piece was about the loss of that no with permissive parenting, and how that leads to a generalized narcissism. So he's focusing on the sort of narcissistic aspect of it. And at the end, I made a joke that was like, whenever I hear you Lacanians talk about this, I always just think that's a lot of words to say conservatives were right about something, right? Like, you're basically saying that the sort of the socially constructed, perhaps maybe somewhat arbitrary role of the no giver is still necessary in development. And then, of course, there's like this tendency that goes, no, but we're postmodern now and we don't need that, and there's some new way. But I think what we're discovering is that there are limits that we run up against, and those don't just go away because we want to wish them away. And in a lot of cases, youth can help a person overcome or push their way past those sort of natural consequences for a while, but eventually it comes back around and bites you in the ass, right? So that's kind of how I'm thinking about it. And so I really liked your focus on limits and types and kinds and separations. And I want to ask about, since you kind of brought up the doxa, you know, especially with like, when you were studying theory in the 90s at Warwick, it was like uncool to talk about nature. Like there's a there. And I'm curious, how, like, what was that like? And how much has that changed? And if that's changed, in what ways? And then maybe later we can get into some questions about like the thinkers that you want to focus on over the next year.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Very good. And just on the no thing, I mean, it is interesting if one is somebody and if one is a woman who has publicly said no to certain things. I mean, the opprobrium is massive. So there is a sense, both I agree in this, that the no is lacking. We're in this paradoxical situation where people still witter on about patriarchy, but at the same time there's clearly a total collapse of paternalism in that sense, and it's not clear that maternalism maternalism can't be paternalism. That's a very strange thing to say, but the no of the mother is just perceived as effing annoying. Jordan Peterson tells young men to tidy their room and they're like, yeah, dude. And their mother tells them to tidy their room and they're like, oh, mom. So I think there is this kind of problem of like, who is saying the no? Like, so if men are, there's no like no of the father, that everything has become permissive. But at the same time, there are these sort of few irritating women saying, no, I don't think the male desire is the most important thing on the planet, or, like, your hard on is not my business or like my concern, and I'm not here to sort of like soothe your passage. Then you're really in trouble, and and that's all good as well. But yeah, it's funny your joke about the conservatives, and yeah, it's liberalism in general is basically how to put it. I mean, yeah, it sort of swims leftward, but even conservatives are liberals. They're just saying slow down a bit, or maybe we shouldn't knock over this gate, to use Chesterton's very overused example. But we don't know what it's for. Like, somebody put it here. Like, of course, we forget about the past. We forget about wisdom, accumulated wisdom, and then history and tradition, and so on. And this name of the future, whatever we mean by that. And yeah, I think to go to the second point about the 90s, and yeah, I mean, it is really very strange as somebody who experienced some of these ideas around I guess cyber utopianism and social constructivism, I guess, and Butler's ideas around gender and queer theory, and sort of things that were going on, less so in my undergraduate, but more as in the postgraduate field. And people were kind of looking forward to something that everybody knew was coming down the pipeline, but I had no idea. I cannot believe, if you like, that like Judith Butler became like global hegemonic policy or whatever. Like these ideas should not have these were like weird people saying strange things in a weird literary way. They weren't even propositional in terms of like, these are not claims that can be verified, right? Like, this is a kind of exercise in literary theory for bored, overeducated people.
Right.
And for this to become like like American imperial policy, you're like, ooh, that's odd. Like, I did not see that coming. So yeah, it's a strange relationship between the academy and the outside. Maybe there is no outside anymore. And I think maybe this question of the outside is very interesting when it comes to nature. And I feel it's also an internal contradiction within philosophy, and this is also to do with sexual difference as well, like the idea that women are tied to nature, and we get this all the way back in the Greeks, and that men are tied instead to the sky and to reason, and they are disembodied, or they have the capacity to be disembodied, and also to treat nature and see nature in terms of its use, its function, its resource aspect, and we would look at also the kind of the role of Christianity and the idea of dominion, and also then when we move into Francis Bacon and Kant and the idea of the mathematization of nature, which is obviously a clear change in the world picture. Like, the moment you can not only map the territory but understand the map as a plan, I suppose, right? Like, everything becomes a question of measure, use, quantity, resource, and we still live in that world, right? We still live in we live in the mathematized world, and then I suppose more on the political or religious side, the question of a kind of paganism, I mean, periodically kind of rears its head, but it's complicated because given that most people in a way largely live in a post-Christian, liberal, secular way, that sort of divide or the opposition or the antagonism between paganism and Christianity doesn't really exist in the same sense. But it doesn't mean that we're not perhaps perennially encountering some of the same tensions, like between a kind of atavism, instinctivism, primitivism, even a kind of an appeal to a world of hierarchy, power, might, and the idea of nature as this kind of brutal, unjust force, which is, as Kant says and the Romantics, it completely indifferent to your survival, right? Like, this is its kind of great power. You can be swept away by a wave or whatever. Like, nature doesn't care. You can be done away with, and all of your moral sensibility will only kick in like later, if at all, right? Like this is the only thing that differentiates us in the second moment of the sublime, is our capacity to stand there and judge and say, but I'm a moral being, I have the capacity to be free. And but we're kind of terrified by nature, including our own nature. We're also very much in the kind of transhumanist era, which Mary Harrington and others have pointed out is less to do with like robotics and fantasies about that, but more to do with reproductive technology. So she regards the pill as the first great mass transhumanist experiment, insofar as it detaches women from their capacity to become pregnant, right? Like, literally detaches sexual behavior from consequence.
Mm-hmm.
And so on. So I think, we're already in transhumanism. Does it make any sense, or is it just I don't know, are we past the point that we can refer to something as nature, as something natural? I don't think so. And I think it haunts, like you say, I think it's what gets repressed. And if you look at something like the Xenofeminist Manifesto, they will say something like, oh, if nature is unjust, change nature. You know what I mean? Like, oh, okay, so the sort of technophilic transhumanist project is just to do what you will, in this demonic Faustian way. Like, okay, we can change these things, right? And as if there aren't consequences, or as if those things are what you imagine you want will be manifest in matter. But I don't think matter behaves that way, and we seem to kind of keep forgetting these sorts of limits.
I guess I want to let Nance come in, because I know he's like our residential postmodernist, and so I mean, I'm joking. Nance is complicated and nuanced on these questions, but I guess, Nance, when I think of you vis-a-vis this course, I think there's a way of talking about nature, a way of mobilizing nature that you don't like, but then there's like this bigger question about like what the human is between nature and, we could talk about ideals. Do ideals even belong to nature, right? Like, are ideals divine? Or this brings us back to the conversation we had about, oh, God is nature, nature's God. Well, that's a problem, because God is a dewormer. Like, God deworms the human. Now, so does the concept of beauty, so does the concept of truth. But there are ideal concepts that can work to deworm us. Now, I say this mostly just for those who were not present for that, so you kind of know about some of the conversation we've had about it. But I guess, yeah, like in terms of, the Cyborg Manifesto and xenofeminism and CCRU and all of that kind of stuff. I'm just kind of curious how your thinking's been developing as you anticipate this course.
I think limits is another word that I peeked up on. I think that's I don't know. I think about limits like more materially and less in the Sacanian way, but I think they're related, because I think without these, like without prohibition, we will come up against material limits eventually, and there will be like material consequences. And so maybe it's just two different registers having the same conversation. But it's also true that, like, as Nina's describing, nurturing plants, like that's stewardship. That's like we are these subjects, and we find ourselves already here, and we can either kind of instrumentalize and operationalize and frame the entire world for our purposes, or we can recognize like maybe our purposes are wrong. Like maybe there's something to this sandbox that we found ourselves in, and maybe we should try to at least steward it rather than operationalizing it. I think while I do see, I don't even know, because the transhumanism thing, I don't think it's good. I just think it's necessary. Like I think it's coming regardless. So it's not to moralize about it. It's just to say, let's understand it and let's do it as good as we possibly can do it. Because I think, yeah, we killed nature already. And if there is a nature, it will exist because we revived it, and we are the stewards of it. So I guess, maintain a split between man and nature, but I also recognize that man emerges from nature, and humanness is contingent on nature, just as it's contingent on divinity. I guess I approach it at trying to understand the human as a necessary part of nature, which I don't think has a whole lot of representation. I do think people come down hard on either side, either go, blast off into the future, or let's be primitivists, let's be Robin Crusoe. So I'm very excited about it. And I think stewardship, the idea of stewardship doesn't get enough play. And nurture, natality, love, the soft and squishy bits of the human that are just as important as the martial prowess and the, capital logic and the amazing, tremendous, great things we can do, the historical things. We're also precarious, fragile, frail creatures. I don't know. I'm excited. Very.
Yeah, I mean, I very much like the idea of stewardship. I mean, I don't think we should go to Mars to escape the mess that we've left here. I think, we there are things we can do here still, not least for ourselves. And yeah, I don't know. I feel somehow that there is something that's still there to be protected. Maybe this is what you mean by stewardship, and cultivated, and all of these things, which are kind of organicist ways of speaking. And I think one of the crucial, interesting things in the ancient Greeks is that their idea of physis is organicist. It's not yet even the atomists. The atomists have a materialist understanding, but it's also organicist, right? It's not yet mechanistic, let's say, right? Like, I think this question of regularity in the concepts and the way in which nature is conceived as something that in a way is self-moving and cyclical and organic. It's difficult for us to go back to that worldview in a way, because we live in the post-mechanical universe. I mean, we live in the enlightened world, and as you say, I think like the transhumanist project, as Mary Harrington and others, it's already underway. I agree, like we're in that world, but I wonder if we're as far through as we might think we are. I definitely think this is the tech question, the question of tools, the question of what we have done, can do, will do, the fact that this is also part of our nature. This is the other thing, right? It's our nature to go beyond our nature. This is like the kind of creature that we are, in terms of concepts, abstractions, but then also real material processes. There's a very interesting book by Alfred Schmidt, who is a student of Horkheimer and Adorno, called Marx's Concept of Nature, in which he tries to exactly analyze what Marx says about nature in all these different places, and how Marx conceives it as primarily a social, productivist, consumerist, not consumerist. I mean, like, where you both produce and consume at the same time, like in the production of use of matter, but that it is first and foremost seen through the social and the human. Like, there is no separation there's no nature that's being referred to behind the scenes, as it were. And I suppose I want there to be this openness to something more poetic, like poiesis, like something that is not productive in the mechanical or machinic sense, but is something to do with the creative quality of nature, which is not perfect, which is precisely not replicable in the same way that something in a factory is produced. That the flaws and the lack of symmetry, the absence of zero in nature is what nature is. And this is like a challenge and a provocation to man's capacity to rationalize things.
Physis is this the word where like force comes from, as well as like being tied into this organicist view of nature?
Yeah, so this came up when I was thinking about this before. So normally we think of force, what's the other word they use? It's well, you have dynamis, I guess, would be the other way of thinking about force, which is where we get the idea of dynamism from. Yeah, I mean, physis is where we get physics from, I guess. Well, it is not, I guess. So they're closely related, and I think these questions of like force and energy and poiesis and things that sort of seem like alive. I mean, one of the questions I struggle with is particularly, I guess, when we get to questions of DNA and the building blocks of life type stuff, is what happens to life? Like life disappears, right? If DNA is not alive, if you like, are we, like, what does it mean to say that we're alive, right? We clearly make all kinds of legal and existential distinctions between being alive and being dead. But our relationship, the interaction between what lives in us and what doesn't, is really a mystery, it seems to me. Like, it just incredibly complicated. And this is not only the sort of problem of qualia and consciousness, that's the sort of one way of looking at some of it, but it's more fundamental. It's when I look outside and I look at the trees and the birds, and then I look at the concrete and the cars, I make an almost automatic distinction between that which lives and that which never lived, or that which was once alive and now is dead, like wood. Like when we look at wood, this was once alive and now it's sort of post-alive. So I'm very, very interested in these distinctions, because to what extent can we say that humans are alive in the same way that trees and plants and birds are alive? Like, what is it? Do we participate in something? And then this question of what the relationship between aliveness and nature is when we talk about nature, we also include things that seem dead, like stones and things like that, or we would also include like trees that are no longer alive. I mean, a tree that's been felled is still nature, or is it? If we're using it, it might be timber, right? We've already kind of transformed it conceptually into something for use. But let's say a tree that has been struck by lightning, it's just useless, right? It's not of use in that sense, right? But even to go back over these distinctions, like to get back again to this point where the world itself confronts us as wonder, as mystery, and I think the demystification of the world, the disenchantment that Weber talks about, the Enlightenment project as the I just went to this amazing exhibition at the Science Museum in London about Versailles, and I had not realized the extent to which the Louis XIV to 15th, 16th were, unbelievably behind the scientific revolution in the sense of, and the Enlightenment project. Like, everything is about this, quantifying, like the explosion of invention. It's really impressive. And I, for a moment, I'm like this gigantic technophile. I think, wow, look at they mapped Cassini maps the moon. They have, the telescope, the microscope, and all these things, and they're covered in gold decor, so that the separation between art, beauty, and science isn't there yet either. It's all just part of the same like wondrous process. And the fountains are like pornographic fountains, and you're like, wow, this is so cool. Anyway, I got wildly off track there, but yes, the sort of wonder.
I want.
Go on.
I want to. So we're talking about the mystery and the wonder and the poiesis in nature, and it does seem like, for Heidegger rethinking Physis, he would want to bring that stuff back into it, though I'm not familiar with his later work, not really intimately. And so, I mean, for me, it's like I just care about a certain segment of his work, and so. But I am interested in how physics separated poiesis from like what's considered most essential about nature, and that was for instrumentalized purposes. Like Bacon and Descartes are very clear of like what they have in mind, like conquering nature. Like it's a very specific like agenda to demystify. But I want to speak to the heathens in the chat. What's up, boys? I haven't been watching chat, so I don't know what is going on in there. I hope you'll all put your hands together and be very attentive for our last co-host for this segment, joining pretty late. Anne is currently listening, and she'll be brought to the foreground here in a second. And I thought maybe a segue would be factory farming. So the reason I called out the chat, I interpolated you guys because I'm assuming there's a bunch of people saying what nature is. I'm assuming that a bunch of people are like, they're hearing us, and instead of getting excited and wondering and getting excited about all these different thinkers who are much smarter than any of us, who spent their whole lives thinking about these things that we'll be getting into, people are instead saying things that they probably could have said when they were still in middle school. They're just repeating it, maybe with a couple extra big words. And so, hey, we're all habitual creatures here, and that's part of the project, and this is the return of the repressed. And so I wanted to highlight something special about what it means to say that something has a nature or something has an essence. And I want to use chickens because Anne and I are moving to a farm. Right. We haven't really been talking too much about it, but if all goes well, we're going to be helping my parents with their farm while I'm still doing Theory Underground, and Anne is going to have so we're going to be helping them as they enter their 70s, and we're going to, in part, be there to not just for the relationship, but also just to learn more about cultivation and stewardship. And it's a whole side of Theory Underground that has tended to be repressed from the conversation. We don't talk about it as much because it's just not been the emphasis for the last couple of years. But the fact that we are moving to a farm and preparing for this speaks to the fact that it's important to us. And then I would also just add that time energy as a concept comes out of a period of my life trying to do the Victory Farm Center for the Humanities. Like, TU is like try number 6, and the Victory Farm Center for the Humanities was try number 2. And so, the idea is the life of the mind and the life of labor, and finding some kind of a symbiosis where you can have intellectual farmers and people who care for the earth. But with all that said, I grew up on a chicken farm, and all I pretty much did was chop their heads off and feed them, so I didn't really have much of a, growing up, like a love or appreciation for them. I was just kind of grossed out by them and didn't want to eat them because I was like, ew. It was much later when I was like, you know what? It's too good to pass up. I can't not. But the thing that made me actually a vegetarian for a year at a very important stage of my development was seeing factory farming and just seeing it. And so I want to shout out Michael. Is it Michael Pollan? Is that his name? Pollan is the Food Inc. guy, right? And so in Food Inc., if you watch the documentary, what's his name? Joel Salatin is the radical farmer that they talk about, and he's all about things getting to live out their essence or their nature and getting to do so cyclically. And so bringing it all back to chickens, I could use a bunch of other animals. The point is like they don't live isolated. They live in harmony with other animals, and that they all serve a function. Every creature has a purpose, and it is in the nature of the chicken to want to sit there and till the soil, not in like this super mechanical evil way, but just in like this sort of like, let's pick through it and like peck up certain kinds of pebbles and certain kinds of creatures and then compost it, right? Like the chicken comes along and does something that turns what would have been poor dirt into rich soil. The chicken is serving an essential function in the ecosystem. Now, lots of birds do that, but chickens are kind of like, we've programmed them to live out their essence even better than ever. Like it's something special. And happy chickens build soil with lots of earthworms in them. And sad chickens turn us into vegans. Sad chickens make us not want to have anything to do with animal agriculture. And so now that Anne's here, I don't know if you have any questions or anything you wanted to say about nature, but I thought, considering the fact that we're moving to a farm and we're talking about things having an essence, things having a nature. And maybe you can speak to the sort of just the deep sense of injustice when you see something that's being forced to live in a way that's contrary to its nature.
Yeah, hello everyone. Good to see you, Nina and Nance. Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the animal agriculture. Because for those who don't know, I am a vegan. I've been vegan since the beginning of 2019, and it's not something that I'm very vocal about because I kind of don't want to be put into like the category of that kind of vegan, because I have no judgments towards other people and what they want to eat. It's like a personal preference, but it is something that I don't get to talk a lot about, kind of my relationship to animals in the industry. And as I progress in my kind of own journey and talking to other people, I think there is this happy medium where humans can and maybe should still be eating animals, or like there's something that you could say is beautiful or is powerful in the relationship of like, okay, we'll protect you from scary nature. We'll give you a good life on this land. And then, this sacrifice, you will feed us. But it seemed like it used to be, at a such smaller scale to where everyone kind of knew this is the animal, this is the cow from the farm next door, or this is from the local butcher who, like, with his own hands, carefully cut this up and for me to eat. Whereas now it's so far removed from the animal, and we'll walk into our local grocery store in the meat department and they'll have little balloons hanging of like happy cows and happy pigs, and like I think that's really sick and twisted. So I'm like, these are not happy cows, these are not happy pigs. And I one time heard like a vegan say that their reason for not eating meat is because of the energy, like the bad energy of like this sad, abused animal that never saw the sunlight, and now we're putting that dead flesh into our own body from these animals that never see the light of day, these chickens that are collapsing under their own weight, these cows that had their babies like ripped away from them the second they were born. And so I know I'm coming in on the end of this conversation, so I don't know exactly like what all to say on that, but yeah, it's something that I think a lot about, and how we can have like a happy medium. And because I don't think we can ask people to stop eating meat or animal products altogether. I don't think that's desirable. I think for most people that probably doesn't work. I think for me, I'm just kind of grossed out by it in general. I'm very happy eating my beans and my tempeh. But there is something beautiful about like the relationship between humans and animals, and the like, I think, sacrifice that comes from, you're going to nourish us. And I'm not saying we need to bring back some sort of like rituals around it, but maybe we should, because it's so far removed. Now you go buy dinosaur shaped chicken nuggets at the grocery store, and they're so far removed from like this living creature that, although is different from us, was sentient, was living. So yeah, that's my contribution, I suppose, to that one.
Do you want me to respond a little bit? We have a couple of minutes. Sure, yeah. First of all, I think I hope you change Theory Underground to Theory Farmyard when you move. But can you have an underground if you live on a farm?
Theory on the ground, yeah.
I will say one fun little thing. This is some lore, deep lore nobody knows except for Nance and Anne, but the treescape that has been featured as the background image for all of the stuff that I've done from this channel for the last at least year, if not year and a half, that treescape is from my parents' farm. Like, it's what you see from their window. And so the city has changed. Like right now it's like it's just LA. It's like a time lapse of LA, and the city used to be Seattle. The city is kind of just irrelevant. Cities are interchangeable. It's this place in nature, between nature and civilization, sort of, so to speak. That. So I mean, yeah, there's something poetic about the fact that that's always been there. Anyway, just made me think about it.
No, it's beautiful. Yeah, no, on the kind of mechanization of mass animal murder, there's no other way to understand industrial farming. And when you see footage of it or read descriptions, yeah, I mean, it's like yeah, I mean, it's mass murder without even the ritual sacrificial dimension, right? Like, it's simply profane slaughter. And sure, I mean, this is I don't know. I mean, I recently reviewed Peter Singer's short book about the turkey, and and I'm not convinced by many of his arguments as a utilitarian, and he's very one of the obvious conclusions, though, to what he's saying would be it would be better if these animals were not born in the first place, right? Like, the way we minimize harm and suffering is for things not to be born at all, right? And this is a very complicated question about what that means for human beings. It is an argument that's been made by Benatar and others, like looking at this idea of the wisdom of Silenus. The best thing is to die soon. The best thing is never to have been born. The second best thing is to die soon, which is Nietzsche quotes. But it's also the argument that Benatar takes up, looking at various cases where people have, for example, sued their parents for bringing them into the world. Can you do that? But Singer talks about, well, what if we just released all the turkeys from these horrible farms, right? Yes, absolutely, right? But logically, what's really going to happen is that they will never be born at all. And we might say, well, this is better in the case of battery farming, right? These animals shouldn't be treated in this way. And your point about the sad passions and the energies of, like, mass slaughtered meat is just, yeah, I mean, I believe that. Like, I'm sure that's true. And ideally, we would like everybody to have access and enough money to occasionally buy meat that is organic, free range, and all of those things, right? Like, that would be the ideal. That's clearly not what happens. That's clearly not the reality. Most meat produced, I think Singer points out, it's like 98% of turkeys are battery, whatever, the factory produced, right? Like, a very small number of people can afford or will spend, let's say, are willing to spend that much money on an expensive turkey. So yeah, we have mass availability of horribly produced sad meat. I agree. Like, this is not a question of harmony, balance, health even. And yeah, the question of health is also going to feature in this discussion of nature. Like, this is really, again, something that people often don't really want to talk about, which is why it's kind of been abandoned to the right, even though it was much more of a kind of leftist thing. At least when I was growing up, the idea that one would be suspicious of, food companies and medicine giving you stuff that was bad for you, potentially, and that the one needed to look after one's own health and that kind of thing, and maybe use alternative medicine. And that somehow that ground has been ceded to like the bodybuilding right, or whatever you want to say. And that's a pity, but we can talk about health. I think it's not our health, the health of what we mean by this concept of health. And that would extend to the whole biosphere. And I think these concepts, go on, Dave.
Oh, sorry. No, please finish.
Oh, well, I was just
there's like the
finish
lag thing.
Yeah. I was just going to finish by basically saying another thing that I think will come up on the course, or definitely will, is these larger concepts like biosphere, environment, planet, globe, atmosphere, environment, and so on. Like these, the concepts that we choose to begin our discussion of nature inevitably condition then what we are able to say about it. Do you know what I mean? So we have to be extremely careful, especially when we're looking at the politicization of nature, whether historically, but also obviously in terms of the environmental green movement, whatever we want to say, less so their sort of strategies and tactics, but more, I think, the metaphysical assumptions that are underlying some of their worldviews, I think are absolutely ripe for unpacking and thinking about in a careful way.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So we're about to roll PSA, and then we'll be back for a follow-up episode on the concept of the right and the question of what's right, for a special episode of our podcast, What's Right, where Nina will be sharing some of her research into the topology of the right today, its constituent contradictions. What are the movements? When we a lot of times when people say right wing, they just kind of have like this catch-all idea, but it turns out there's a bunch of different versions competing right now. And I guess I just want to say in close, the reason I'd said, hey boys, in the chat, and then I tied in the example with the chicken, is to really drive home the distinction between nature and something having a nature. And if people want to try to say that humans have no nature, that's fine. I mean, okay, there's all kinds of reasons that suggest themselves to me as to why a person might want to think that. And that doesn't mean it's not true, but it is sus. But with that said, are you going to try to tell me a chicken doesn't have a nature? Are you going to try to... Because that's how far it's gone. People were fine talking about chickens having natures, but now it's like, no, nothing has a nature. There's just nature. And because as soon as you say that something has a nature, there's some kind of implicit ought, some kind of a implicit moral or ethical judgment. Like to say that a chicken has a nature means that we have to honor something about that. We can't just make it be whatever we want, like a chicken sandwich. At least not an industrial one. Nance, what were you going to say there?
To anticipate the pushback from the postmoderns, they would just say, like man has got our greedy little fingers in everything. So this nature in the chicken, well, the chicken's a domesticated animal, so that's a constructed nature. Now, I don't agree with that, but that is the rejoinder to that statement.
Well, and I think that there's lots of great rejoinders to that rejoinder, but that'll be the sort of nature of this course on nature. So everybody, thank you. Yes, Nina gets the last word.
Well, yeah, I just want to say I've been totally up for all of these discussions and controversies, and I know, that I realize there's something kind of provocative at precisely the point about, in a way, defending nature. Like, what does that even mean? Like, what can that mean? And so precisely to come up against these like hard antagonisms, and these sort of psychoanalytic critiques and all of those and the materialist critiques, kind of is the point, right? And I'm completely open to, every observation, critique, argument, so on. So.
All right. We'll be right back after this. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. If you're on the podcast, drop a comment about why you liked it, rate and review if you please. And if you're on the YouTube, let us know something that you got from this. Everybody else, we hope to see you in this class, Philosophy of Nature, and that you'll be along for the ride as we weave this braid between all these different courses and seminars for the year of 2025. Go ahead and just click the link in the description or go to theoryunderground.com/subscribe. Take care. You can support the free and public work at TU by becoming a patron over at Patreon. But if you would like to get involved and become a member at Theory Underground so that you can listen to special content that is not accessible to anyone else, or if you go up a subscriber level, actually join in the discussions, or at the top level, have us actually read your work, giving constructive feedback and ultimately paving a way to potentially being a part of what we call the turn, then you'll want to become a subscriber. That's how you will access the ongoing courses and seminars. We've brought together Benjamin Studebaker's experience in political theory and science and philosophy with my critical social theory, phenomenology, existentialism, critique of political economy, critical media theory approach, combined with Michael Downes's fault line theory. You know, the CCRU versus Ljubljana School, or Žižek versus Land. And of course, how he brings those against one another and then transcends them through other thinkers like Baudrillard, who he'll be teaching an intro course to in 2025. All of us are teaching stuff in 2025 that rhymes or argues or goes together. And so the best way to accelerate your development getting into theory right now is to just become a subscriber at TU. Just go to the website, click get involved, and look, what I'm about to play for you all is a really special moment from our documentary that we're working on, an interview where Benjamin explains why he's supporting Theory Underground and getting involved as a active member here at the core of the teaching team.
Yeah, so the thing that I notice is that a lot of people criticize the university, they criticize the left, they don't build an alternative institution. They will go, the university sucks, but you know what's great? Substack and Patreon and YouTube, and they'll lean into that. But that is a negation, right? You guys don't do that. You guys are interested in sublating the university within the newly emergent media. Or you could frame it the other way, sublating the newly emergent media within the university, right? And so this, of course, will ultimately lead, if you take it where it goes, to a question of institutions and having actual economic, social role possibilities for theorists. This is the critical crisis, which is that there are still some very bright, very well-educated people, but they are not able to replace themselves. And because most of them have university positions, their level of interest in replacing themselves is to some degree compromised.
Yeah.
They don't have to worry that much about themselves. They don't have that much stake in it because they're already set up. However, because you aren't in the underground, you have some potential of being able to actually create an institution or structure which makes it possible for people to do theory in the future. This is something that, as far as I can tell, only you are doing. The thing about freeing Mikey from wage labor, this idea not only that your channel would free you from the Amazon job, but that this could grow in such a way that it could provide spaces for multiple people, and then those multiple people could interact in the way that they would in a monastery or in a university department. This is the revolutionary idea in terms of raising consciousness and making it possible for us to think in such a way that we could return even to the horizons of the tens and talking about things like Medicare for all in a not stupid, not bullshit way, in a serious way. To get to that point, we need to raise our level of ability to think. We need new intellectuals in our generation that are real intellectuals and not people who are running around scared of what the DSA or their university department thinks of them. you have the potential to actually make a real material intervention into not just knowledge production, but in Bildung, into the making of people. Yeah. This is something that we can do. There's a window right now where I am not in the university, and so I have a real reason to think very seriously about, can we do something else? Because I'm annoyed, myself with the whole process of trying to be in that. And I would like there to be something else, something better. I have all my critiques of it that come in part from being at Cambridge, in part from studying ancient thinkers. We could do something better than it. Not just something that is an imitation or steals some things from it and does the best you can with it, but something that actually is better and that produces the kind of theory that in modernity, how do you make a Hegel? How do you make a Marx? We have to reinvent this. It's no longer possible to do that. We've got to, I think, actually institutionalize in a material way, and this is the sense in which I will uphold the kernel of materialism, actually giving a shit about the structure and what kind of structure is necessary to give rise to a form of life in which this kind of really, really good work can be produced.